fog rolls across the marshlands east of Savannah. The air is heavy, damp, and silent, until the echo of boots breaks the stillness. A man walks alone through the mist, coat torn, breath shallow. In one hand, he clutches a folded letter. In the other, a rusted key. Behind him, the ruins of a mansion loom through the fog, its marble columns scorched black by a fire long extinguished. They called it the Whitfield estate once, a monument to power, to pride, and to betrayal. But tonight, what remains of that legacy stirs again. Hidden journals, sealed ledgers, and the unmarked grave of a man the world tried to erase. What was buried beneath the ashes wasn't just a crime. It was a truth so dangerous it could destroy bloodlines. And for those who still bear the Whitfield name, the ghosts of 1843 aren't finished speaking. Not yet. If stories of buried legacies and moral reckoning draw you in, stay. Subscribe, share this film, and walk with us into the heart of Savannah's forgotten truth. Each week we uncover another shadow, another chapter erased from history. Your curiosity fuels this journey. Your voice keeps these stories alive. The night Thomas Whitfield died, the sky above Savannah bled crimson through the haze of storm clouds. Thunder crawled over the horizon, shaking the windows of a house built on arrogance and fear. Inside, men moved like ghosts, servants, soldiers, sons of labor, each afraid to speak of the sound they'd heard moments earlier. A crash, a cry, then silence. Only one man dared approach the master's chamber. His name was Samuel. Samuel's steps were deliberate, each one echoing across the polished floors that had felt his weight 1,000 times before. In the flicker of candlelight, his shadow stretched like a specter across the hallway walls. The door creaked open. A half-empty decanter of brandy rested on the desk beside Thomas Whitfield's lifeless hand. His face was pale, eyes half open, lips parted as if caught mid-argument with fate. The room smelled of smoke and fear. Samuel didn't move at first. He only stared, as if his mind refused to accept what his eyes already knew. The master was gone, and with him, the fragile balance that had kept this world from tearing itself apart. From the hallway, another voice called out, a foreman, stern and trembling. "Is he—" The question hung in the air, unfinished. Samuel simply nodded. The word never came. By dawn, the estate was alive with whispers. Some claimed the master had suffered a stroke. Others muttered about poison, about vengeance, about debts never settled. But none dared speak Samuel's name above a whisper. He was the man closest to Whitfield in life, his steward, his confidant, the keeper of his ledgers and secrets. That made him both invaluable and expendable. The funeral came swiftly. Over 300 men gathered beneath the oaks of Bonaventure Cemetery, hats low, eyes colder than the stone they buried him under. The city's elite watched, already calculating what might be lost or gained. Among them stood Charles Whitfield, Thomas's elder brother, a man forged from iron discipline and quiet cruelty. His gaze lingered not on the coffin but on Samuel, long, measured, suspicious. When the last handful of dirt hit the casket, thunder rolled again. Somewhere in the distance, a storm gathered over the Savannah River, and with it came the smell of change. That night, Samuel returned to the mansion to find the locks changed, his quarters sealed, the ledgers he'd maintained gone. He understood the message without words. He was no longer a servant, he was a liability. But there were things hidden still. Documents, letters, proof that could shift the weight of inheritance. Samuel had copied every figure, every debt, every signature. He kept them buried beneath a loose stone in the carriage house. He sat in the dark that night, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. Every creak sounded like footsteps, every flicker of light like eyes watching him from the shadows. The Whitfield brothers met by lamplight the next morning. Charles spoke of preserving the family's reputation, of securing the estate. His younger brother Edward said little, only stared at the fire, jaw clenched. They agreed on one thing: Samuel must disappear. Not immediately, not violently, but quietly. His knowledge was too dangerous, his loyalty too uncertain. Men like him were not meant to hold power, even in whispers. By week's end, rumors spread that Samuel was being transferred. No one asked where. No one dared. The men on the estate looked away when he passed, each aware that speaking his name could invite ruin. Samuel, however, had no intention of running. He'd seen too much, known too much, and in the quiet of the carriage house he began writing his own account, line by line, memory by memory. He wrote about the night Thomas confessed his fear, that his brothers were plotting to divide the estate, that money owed to northern investors might destroy the family name. He wrote about the arguments, the threats, the brandy. He remembered the trembling hand pouring that final drink, the faint bitterness in the air, the look of realization on Whitfield's face before his eyes dimmed. That moment burned into Samuel's mind like scripture. The next day, 2 men arrived on horseback, carrying orders sealed with the Whitfield crest. They demanded entry to the carriage house. Samuel handed them the key himself, calm, deliberate, unreadable. They searched for hours, but found nothing. The ledgers were gone, the letters missing. Samuel's room bare except for a single folded sheet resting on the desk. His resignation. Charles read it aloud, his voice cold as iron. For all debts unpaid, I leave you the truth. It will find its way home, whether through paper or blood. He crumpled it, but the words lingered like smoke. Days turned into weeks. The plantation quieted. Fields were tended. The world pretended to move on. Yet at night, Charles claimed he heard footsteps outside his window. Slow, deliberate, familiar. Edward dismissed it as guilt, but guilt was a language Charles never learned. Still, he kept a pistol by his bed and the shutters locked. He didn't fear ghosts. He feared justice. In town, whispers grew darker. A clerk at the courthouse mentioned irregularities in the will. Another swore he saw Samuel near the river, carrying a satchel heavy enough to hold something more than clothes. Then, one humid morning, a rider came thundering through the gates, pale as chalk. A body had been found hanging from a cypress tree 2 miles from the estate. The sheriff's men said it was Samuel. Suicide, they claimed. The official report was signed before sundown. But those who'd known Samuel shook their heads. He wasn't the kind of man to bow out quietly. Charles ordered the burial done quickly. No ceremony, no marker, just earth and silence. Yet something in his eyes betrayed him. Relief, fear, and perhaps the faintest trace of regret. That night, rain fell in sheets. Lightning illuminated the mansion's facade, revealing a single figure standing beneath the portico. A man soaked to the bone, hat in hand, watching the windows with quiet fury. The next flash of light showed nothing there. Only empty steps and the wind howling through the columns. But the dogs refused to leave the porch until dawn. Years later, workers restoring the estate found a small tin box buried beneath the carriage house floorboards. Inside were pages, brittle and stained, words written in a steady, precise hand. The first line read, "A man may be owned in body, but never in truth." The rest, an account of deceit, of death, and of brothers who sold their souls for inheritance. The documents vanished before they reached the courthouse. The worker who found them left town the next day, taking the story with him. Or perhaps it took him. What began as a tale of wealth became a legacy of ghosts. Men haunted not by spirits, but by the truth they'd buried alive. And beneath the moss-draped trees of Savannah, that truth still breathes, because justice, like memory, does not rot. It waits. Morning sunlight broke through the Spanish moss like thin blades of gold. The Whitfield estate shimmered in that light, serene, deceitful, quiet. Yet beneath its order, something restless stirred. Men whispered Samuel's name even when forbidden. Some said he'd escaped. Others swore his ghost watched from the trees. Either way, his absence left a hole no amount of silence could fill. Charles Whitfield tried to restore normalcy. He spoke of duty, legacy, the family name. But behind his sermons lay fear. Fear that the past wasn't buried deep enough. Fear that Samuel had left something behind. In the ledgers, Charles found missing pages, financial records with gaps too neat to be accidental. Someone had erased history with precision, leaving just enough to suggest a secret worth dying for. He summoned the overseer, a loyal man named Harris. Broad-shouldered, scarred, built from obedience. "Find it," Charles ordered. "Whatever Samuel hid, find it." Harris nodded once, no questions, only loyalty. Days passed. The men searched, every trunk, every cellar, every inch of the carriage house. Nothing. But one night, Harris returned pale, carrying a torn scrap of parchment. On it, an unfinished map. Coordinates scrawled in Samuel's hand. A signature at the bottom. For the heir who understands chains are not always forged of iron. Charles stared at it for hours. The handwriting was unmistakable. He burned the parchment that night, but its message burrowed deep into his mind. What heir? What inheritance could a dead man leave behind? The next morning, he rode to Savannah. He met with Judge Parker, the same man who'd approved Thomas's estate transfer. They spoke in a closed chamber, voices low, tense. "Let the matter rest," the judge warned. "The dead have a way of reaching for the living when disturbed." Charles smiled thinly. "Then I'll keep my distance from graves, Your Honor." But he didn't. He couldn't. That night, he sent Harris and 2 men to the swampland where Samuel's body had been found. They dug through the wet soil, following memory and fear. What they unearthed was not treasure nor parchment, but a wooden box. Small, sealed with pitch. Harris pried it open with his knife and stepped back. Inside lay a ring. Gold, bearing the Whitfield crest. Charles recognized it instantly. It had belonged to Thomas, buried with him, or so everyone believed. He said nothing. He only stared at the ring, then at the swamp, then at the men who had seen it. "Forget what you've seen," he said. But men rarely forget the face of someone lying. 2 weeks later, Harris vanished. His horse was found wandering near the river, his boots beside a patch of trampled reeds. The sheriff called it an accident. No one believed him. The estate grew quieter. The workers avoided the carriage house after sundown. The dogs refused to sleep near the swamp. And in the main hall, Charles began to dream. He dreamt of Thomas, face bloated, eyes open, whispering from the marble tomb. "You buried the wrong man." He'd wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding, the sound of chains rattling faintly in the wind. Edward tried to reason with him. "You're chasing ghosts," he said. "The past doesn't need your justice." But Charles wasn't listening anymore. He was being hunted by the truth, not chasing it. The following week, he ordered the family records moved from the courthouse to the estate vault. "Security reasons," he said. But when the crates arrived, one was missing. The clerk who delivered them resigned the next morning. Inside the remaining crates, Charles found more than documents. Letters, correspondence between Thomas and a man in Boston named Hayes, discussions of trust accounts, emancipation loopholes, and a transfer of assets to Philadelphia. For a moment, Charles couldn't breathe. Thomas had planned to grant freedom and inheritance to Samuel, a man the law saw as property. The heir Samuel mentioned wasn't blood, it was chosen. Rage consumed him. He saw betrayal in every letter, his brother's compassion twisted into an act of treason, And in that rage, Charles made a vow, no record, no rumor, no trace of this would survive. He fed the letters to the fire. One by one, the flames devoured them, curling ink into ash. But one page slipped from his grasp, drifting under the desk, unburned. That page bore Samuel's handwriting. "If truth is a chain, then I accept its weight, for in it lies freedom." Charles read it twice before tearing it apart, but the words refused to leave his mind. By winter, Edward fell ill. Fever. Delirium. He spoke Samuel's name in his sleep. Some said guilt killed him. Others said poison. No one asked which version Charles believed. After the burial, Charles stood alone by the family mausoleum, the marble cold beneath his hand. "You tried to make him one of us," he whispered. "You gave him our name." He spat on the ground, but the echo of his own voice came back hollow, as if the tomb itself were mocking him. He turned away, but not before noticing something strange: footprints in the damp soil, barefoot, fresh. That night, the estate burned a single candle in every window, a superstition, a warning to restless spirits. But even with light, the shadows never left. Years crawled forward. The Civil War tore through Georgia, taking men, land, and purpose. Yet the Whitfield estate remained, scarred but standing. Its history sealed behind oak doors and old money. Charles aged into silence. His hair turned to ash, his hands unsteady. Still, every night, he walked the grounds with a lantern, whispering to the dark, "You think I've forgotten you? I remember everything." One stormy evening, his caretaker found him by the carriage house door. The lantern lay shattered beside him. The old man's face was peaceful for once, eyes closed, lips parted as if mid-conversation. In his palm was a key, rusted, the same key Samuel once carried, the one that opened the master's study. No one knew how it returned. No one dared ask. When they laid Charles to rest beside his brothers, the gravedigger swore he heard a voice whisper from the soil. A single word: Heir. The men said nothing, but that night, none of them slept easy. Decades later, the Whitfield estate passed through generations, each one more removed from the curse that built it. The mansion stood, but its heart was gone. Locals claimed the swamp behind the property never quieted. Some nights, they said, a single candle flickered in the carriage house, though no one had lived there in decades. And sometimes, if the wind carried just right, a man's voice could be heard from the dark, steady, calm, unbroken. "Freedom," it said. "Remember." The past does not fade in Savannah. It lingers. It breathes. And when the world forgets, it waits for someone brave or foolish enough to open the door again. The Whitfield mansion stood hollow now, its columns streaked with moss, its marble staircase worn thin by generations of restless boots. Yet the air still carried the weight of men who refused to be forgotten. In 1862, with the war burning through Georgia, the estate fell into the hands of a distant nephew, Marcus Whitfield. A man who valued order, reputation, and the steady illusion of control. He called himself custodian, but deep down he knew he was warden. He'd heard the stories whispered through the halls, the ledger Samuel kept, the missing inheritance, the curse that haunted the Whitfield name. Marcus dismissed them at first, until he opened the old vault beneath the study. Inside, among rotted papers and cracked leather bindings, lay a single-bound volume untouched by time. The Ledger of 1843. Its cover bore no title, only initials burned deep into the leather. S.W. The pages trembled in his hands. Written in Samuel's meticulous script, the words bled truth and defiance. They called me servant, yet I carried the weight of their world. Let this record judge them as they judged me. Marcus read until dawn. Each line peeled back the lies his family had lived upon. The deals, the false wills, the quiet murders disguised as accidents. It wasn't a confession. It was an indictment. He poured himself a drink, stared into the fire, and realized his inheritance wasn't land or gold. It was guilt, centuries of it, waiting for a man brave or foolish enough to bear its name. That night, the war reached Savannah. Cannon fire echoed in the distance. The Whitfield estate stood untouched, too old and cursed for soldiers to covet. But inside, a different kind of battle began. Marcus gathered the men who worked the grounds. He spoke of rebuilding, of honoring truth over legacy. "This house was built on silence," he said. "It's time we break it." Some nodded. Others turned away. One man, Elias, older than most, stepped forward. "You can't free a ghost, sir. You can only join him." His words lingered like smoke in the firelight. The next morning, Marcus rode into town to show the ledger to a lawyer named Finch, a quiet man known for keeping dangerous secrets. When Marcus returned home, the ledger was gone. His study was untouched, the vault sealed, no signs of forced entry. Only a single object lay on the desk, a rusted key, the same one every Whitfield heir swore had vanished. He stared at it until dusk, then locked it away. But sleep refused him. In his dreams, he saw Samuel's handwriting filling the walls, each line repeating the same phrase. "A name built on silence is no name at all." Weeks turned to months. The war ended. The world moved on. But Marcus remained shackled to what he'd read. He rebuilt the mansion, restored its name, hosted gatherings again. Yet behind the civility, his eyes stayed haunted. He began keeping his own journal, mirroring Samuel's style, line for line, truth for truth. He wrote about how power corrupts not through violence, but through omission, how a man can kill without lifting a hand simply by remaining silent. Each night he'd lock the journal beside the key, whispering, "So the next Whitfield will know." But history has a way of swallowing warnings whole. In 1872, a flood swept through the lowlands. The carriage house collapsed. The vault doors rusted shut. The ledger, the journal, the key, all buried beneath mud and time. Marcus never rebuilt. He left the estate to rot. He moved north, seeking distance from the ghosts his blood refused to forget. Yet wherever he went, Savannah followed. The sound of rain on windows, the echo of a voice that didn't belong to him. By the time he died, his mind had unraveled into fragments of memory and remorse. His final entry, scrawled in a trembling hand, read, "Truth survives even when names decay." Decades passed. The estate changed hands again, first to bankers, then to timbermen, then to silence itself. By the 1950s, only foundations remained, stone bones swallowed by vines. But the land remembered. Every nail, every root, every drop of rain carried whispers of Samuel's words. And one summer, when bulldozers came to clear the ruins, they struck something solid beneath the soil. A tin box, rusted, sealed tight. Inside, pages bound by twine. Samuel's ledger, Marcus's journal, the family's confession, entwined across generations like a wound that refused to heal. The workers who found it read only the first page before handing it over to the county. That night, their foreman vanished. His boots were found by the swamp at dawn. When the box reached the courthouse, it was sealed for archival processing. Then it vanished. No record, no trace. The truth buried once more beneath bureaucracy and fear. Years later, a historian named Robert Whitfield, last of the bloodline, began his own search. He'd grown up hearing rumors, family madness, haunted land, a name whispered with unease. Robert wasn't after redemption. He wanted understanding. To know why his ancestors' faces looked so much like his own, yet carried eyes full of something darker. He tracked records across states, piecing together fragments, court transcripts, death notices, property deeds. Each clue led him back to the same coordinates, the ruins of his family's estate. When he arrived, the air felt heavier, like the land itself recognized him. He stood among the stones, reading names worn smooth by rain. Then he found it, a marker carved with a single letter, S. He knelt. The soil was damp, the roots thick. Beneath his hand, something metallic. He dug until his nails split, until the earth gave way to a shape, another box, older than time itself. Inside, he found pages untouched by decay. Not Samuel's ledger, not Marcus's journal, but something newer, a message written in a hand eerily familiar. If you are reading this, the silence ends with you. The truth is not cursed, it's ours to carry. Robert looked up. The forest swayed, whispering in the wind. Somewhere in that rustling he could swear he heard footsteps, slow, heavy, patient. He didn't run. He only whispered into the dark, "I hear you." The response came like the hush before rain. "Then speak." And for the first time in 100 years, the ledger of silence was opened not as confession, but as reckoning. The swamp that bordered the old Whitfield estate had always been a graveyard for secrets. Mist rose from its surface like breath from something ancient, alive and waiting. Men said the air there hummed, like the earth whispering names it refused to forget. When Robert Whitfield returned to Savannah in 2007, he wasn't searching for ghosts. He was searching for proof. The family name had been both armor and curse, and now he wanted to know why. He rented a small cabin 2 miles from the ruins. Each morning he walked the path that once led to the mansion's grand entrance, his boots sinking into the soil where carriages once rolled. The land had swallowed everything except the memory of footsteps. On his second night, rain hammered the windows. He sat by the lantern light, studying Samuel's recovered pages. The words read like scripture, part confession, part prophecy. One day another will return, not for wealth, but for truth. When he does, let him listen before he speaks. The next morning, he followed the map Samuel had drawn, faded coordinates, a line tracing through the swamp to an X marked the rest. The same place the workers claimed they'd found the hanging tree. Branches hung low, dripping with moss, and the air smelled of rust and rain. Every step forward sounded like memory cracking open. Robert stopped where the roots twisted into a natural arch and knelt. There, half buried in mud, he found it. A fragment of stone carved with the letter S, the same marker the trespassing students had written about decades before. Only now it wasn't alone. Beside it lay another stone, smaller, newer, with an engraving barely visible beneath the moss. M.W. Marcus Whitfield, his ancestor, the man who had tried to end the curse and failed. Robert felt his chest tighten. 2 men, one born to chains, the other to privilege, buried side by side in unmarked ground. The world above had forgotten, but the earth remembered. He cleared the stones, tracing the grooves with trembling hands. As he did, something shifted in the soil, a hollow thud. He dug with his bare hands until a wooden box surfaced, sealed with wax, its surface scorched but intact. Inside were pages wrapped in oilcloth. The handwriting belonged to Marcus, but the ink, dark, wet, too fresh, as if someone had written them yesterday. The first line read, "To the last of our name. If you've found this, then the debt is still unpaid." Robert froze. The ink smudged under his thumb. Not dry, not old. He looked around. The swamp was silent. Too silent. Not a bird, not an insect, not the whisper of wind, only the sound of his own breath. He read on. "Samuel's truth was buried to protect us, but protection breeds rot. You cannot outrun the sins of blood. They follow you like shadow." A ripple crossed the swamp water. Then another. Robert turned, lantern trembling in his grip. The surface moved as if something beneath it had stirred awake. He stepped back, clutching the pages to his chest. Then from the darkness, a figure emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in the tattered remains of a coat, his face hidden in shadow, his voice low and calm. "You came back," the voice said. It wasn't accusation. It was recognition. Robert's throat tightened. "Who are you?" The figure stepped closer, the air bending around him. "You already know." Robert's mind screamed. Impossible. But his heart knew. The voice was steady, weighted with patience that only death could teach. "You carried my name," the figure said. "Now carry my truth." He held out a hand, not threatening, not spectral, simply there. Robert hesitated, then reached forward. The air between them crackled with heat and cold all at once. When their hands met, the swamp fell utterly silent. In that instant, Robert saw everything. Samuel's life, Thomas's death, Charles's betrayal, Marcus's guilt. The generations that had traded truth for peace and lost both. It wasn't a haunting. It was inheritance. Then the vision broke. The swamp was empty again. The box lay open, the pages gone. Only one line remained carved into the wood. "You are the heir now." He stumbled back through the trees, drenched and shaking, until the cabin came into view. But when he opened the door, the lanterns were already lit. The desk held a new book, bound in dark leather. He approached slowly. The cover bore the same initials as before, S.W. Inside, the first page was blank, except for one faint sentence at the top. "Write." That night, Robert wrote until dawn. He wrote everything, the family's sins, the ledger's truth, the names erased, and the men who buried them. He wrote as if guided by another hand, words flowing like confession through ink. When he finished, the swamp outside had gone quiet again. The fog rolled low, curling around the cabin like a living thing. He placed the finished book on the windowsill and whispered, "It's done." The next morning, the cabin was empty. Only the book remained. A ranger found it weeks later. Its final entry dated the day before the storm swallowed half the forest road. No trace of Robert Whitfield was ever found. But the journal survived, passed from hand to hand, reader to reader. And in every telling, the words changed just slightly, as though they were still being written, still alive, still restless. Today, the land where the Whitfield estate once stood is fenced off. The owners claim it's for conservation, to protect the swamp's fragile ecosystem. But locals know better. They say if you stand near the old cypress line at dusk, you'll hear it. The slow, rhythmic echo of footsteps through water. Sometimes one pair, sometimes two, always walking side by side. Men who hear it never speak of it twice. Not out of fear, but respect. Because some stories aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be carried. The Whitfield legacy was never about ghosts or guilt. It was about men bound by choices, some born of pride, some of pain, all of consequence. And though the mansion has long since turned to dust, the echo of that brotherhood, flawed, burdened, eternal, still lingers in Savannah's breath. A reminder whispered by wind through Spanish moss, by river fog at dawn, by the quiet courage of men who refuse to forget. The truth doesn't die, it waits. And when the next man finds the courage to dig through silence, the swamp will rise again, ready to listen. Because history is not haunted by the dead. It's haunted by the living who keep pretending it's over. And in Savannah, the story never ends.